Hello guys, my name is SVB and I'm back from illness with another video, and today we're going to be discussing the 3 phases of Overwatch. This is something I touched on briefly in one of my previous videos where I spoke about how Lucio helps teams transition more quickly through phases, which is why he's so useful. But a lot of you have asked me to elaborate on this concept because it wasn't something you were familiar with, so today I'm going to talk in detail about what these phases are and why understanding them will give you a lot better grasp of why certain things occur in Overwatch and why certain comps behave the way they do. So let's get to it, guys. So we can start very simply by recapping what the 3 phases of Overwatch are. These are the grouping phase, the initiation phase, and the combat phase. Now these are not by any means hard and fast rules. In fact, I've not really heard anyone else speak of Overwatch within the frame of having 3 specific phases. However, the principles here are not anything new. They are understood by all high-level teams and players and coaches, sometimes consciously, sometimes subconsciously. Someone else might categorize them differently, or argue that there are more than 3 phases or less than 3 phases, but I'm going to categorize them as mentioned because I think it's handy to give them some sort of terminology so that we can all communicate, understand, and discuss these ideas better. Now, the grouping phase is straightforward. This is the time spent waiting for your team to gather into a full 6. At the start of the game, this happens naturally, because you all spawn at the same time in the same place, but once fights begin and players start dying at different times, you start having to make sure that you can all find a place to group up safely. The initiation phase is the most broad category, but generally this is the time you spend after you've grouped up and you're looking for a window of opportunity to initiate a fight. Finally, we have the combat phase, where both teams use their abilities and weapons, brawl it out, and inevitably, one team comes out on top of the other. Now how long these phases last, how important they are, and how they shift dynamically varies based on the coordination and skill level of the players you're playing with and also the comp you're running. So let's talk through how this all occurs and why this matters in a game of Overwatch. The first thing that a lot of you watching this video will comment on is probably the grouping phase and how your teammates never group up. This is an incredibly common gripe amongst players in all ranks of ladder play, but particularly in the lower ranks, you will see people constantly trickle in and fail to gather together. As you progress through the ranks, you will generally see a natural progression of players starting to group up more, though of course, even masters and GMs will often trickle like idiots, and these ranks come with their own problems. Ideally, this phase will last as short as physically possible, no matter what comp you're running or what the situation is. This phase is really the absolute basic of Overwatch. Nothing significantly good happens for your team here, and the only thing that can happen really is if you take too long and waste your own time, it's a big setback. It also follows logic that if you can't even group up and get to the initiation and combat phases, you're probably not a very good team, and you'll really struggle to get anywhere in a game. Good teams, like those in Overwatch League, will almost never stall out or spend too long in this phase of the game. The initiation phase and the combat phase are a little more complex, and how they operate is a lot more dynamic. They can be slow, or they can be incredibly quick. For example, what even is the initiation phase? When does it end, and when does the combat phase begin? To elaborate on this, let's talk about the different comps and what they want to achieve. Perhaps the easiest example to discuss this with is a dive comp. With a dive comp, once you've grouped up, the initiation phase is incredibly important. You want to get all your dive characters into a position where they're only one ability use away from their intended target. To set this up though, may take time. You need to get your Genji, your Winston, your Diva, and your Tracer perhaps into a position somewhere safe and protected. And most importantly, you need to wait till they have all their cooldowns ready. For example, you may be playing on Numbani Point A and trying to set up a dive attack against a team set up on the high ground. If you just run down Main Street and try to jump them, not only will you take a lot of entry damage, but a lot of your team will not be able to cover the distance quickly enough. Now, say you're running the old school dive comp, each of these characters will want to approach from different angles due to the nature of their abilities, and generally, attacking from multiple angles is a good practice anyways. In this scenario, you might want to send your Tracer up the stairs and around the corner to attack from behind. Your Genji might want to wall climb onto the high ground and wait to dash along with your Diva. Your Winston might use his first jump to get across the point into the little room so that he's then close enough to actually jump the high ground without being in line of sight and without needing to drop his bubble early. If you're running an Ana and or Zen, you may even want to send them up the high ground and have them wait to appear. To do all of this takes time obviously, so the initiation phase can take a while, but once you decide to dive, you'll want to transition between phases very quickly. Why is this? Well, dive comps have a very quick time to kill, or TTK, if they all focus the same target. But to do this, they need to burst a character down together. If, for example, you dive in one at a time, you lose the burst potential and the character you're attacking might get healed up or protected. Therefore, a comp like dive requires rapid execution and a quick transition. It also requires a short combat phase, but I'll elaborate on that later. In a different scenario or with a different comp, you may want your initiation phase to be very short. For example, take any control map. The nature of a control point means that when the game starts, both teams are at neutral. No one is attacking or defending, and instead, you're both competing for the exact same ground. In this case, let's say you're in Nepal village, and you're both running Ryan Zarya. Your win condition here is speed. You want to get to the high ground and contest as physically fast as possible. Pretty much the minute the spawn doors open, you want to get into the face of the enemy and deny them room to breathe. Ordinarily, you both will reach the same spot at the same time. But if you have a Lucio and they don't, you will get there first, meaning you can take more space and meaning that you're more likely to win the fight, because you can force them into a corridor. So in this situation, speeding up your initiation phase will allow you a tactical advantage and let you control way more territory than the enemy team. Now, in the interest of being thorough, let's look at a third example. So you're running a goats comp versus a bunker. Now I know as of recording this video, role queue is coming soon and goats will be a thing of the past, but you can still apply the same principle to a Ryan Zarya comp. Now obviously, you don't want to be holding your Ryan shield against the Orisa forever, because it will break and it will expose your teammates. But in this situation, the most important thing is your pathing. So making sure you approach from the right direction, even if it takes a long time, is absolutely vital. Let's look at Hanamura Point A. If they're set up on the high ground, you have three options. You can go straight, but chances are you'll take so much damage on the way in that your shield will break, and by the time you get to point, you'll have probably lost a couple characters along the way. So the next option is to go left. But again, there isn't any great cover while you're doing it, meaning you will likely take a lot of entry damage. Going left or middle would be the fastest ways of initiating this fight, but it would also be the most dangerous. The safest and the longest way is through the right room, because it's a path entirely covered, and for the one bit that you're exposed, that's the bridge crossing, you're too far away from people like Roadhog to hit you, so there's no chance that your shield breaks. This is the path that's most likely going to get you to point, and it's the one that keeps most of your resources intact. But of course, it costs you a different resource, time. So this is something you have to be mindful of. But as you can see, this is a really dynamic process. How fast or how slow you want things to go varies very much based on the strengths of your comp versus the enemy's comp, and what your win condition is, and what the map architecture is. Sometimes, you may want to play the initiation phase very passively. Maybe you're playing with a character in your team who you hope makes a play. For example, if you're running an Ana, and you're waiting for her to land a big biotic nade. And sometimes, your cue to shift from the initiation phase into the combat phase is not planned. Perhaps, you're setting up, and suddenly, your Widowmaker gets a pick, giving you a 5v6 situation. In that case, you might want to immediately stop what you were doing, and just start the fight while you have a window of opportunity. Ultimately, what's important is that you're clear about how you're going to win the upcoming fight, and you make a decisive play to ensure that happens. The tip I would give is, consider how you want the next fight to go in an ideal situation, and what you think the opponents would want in their ideal situations, and then work from there. Make your ideal happen, and play around trying to minimize theirs. Finally, once the trigger is pulled, and you're ready to fight, you'd conduct what Coach Mineral calls a tempo shift, and enter the combat phase. In poorly coordinated teams, this is a messy phase, and often initiated only by one or two players. But ideally, this involves your entire team committing to a fight. What this phase is obviously not complicated. This is when all the pew pew happens. However, what's important to understand from a tactical perspective is how long you want this phase to last. Ideally, in any comp, in any scenario, you will win the combat phase as quickly as possible. It's an easy wipe, you kill everybody, no sweat. But obviously, this is not always the case. In fact, it's rarely the case. So then, it's on you to try and assess how much sustainability you have within a certain fight. Let's look at this little chart for example. With a dive comp, the answer of how much sustainability I have is not a lot. Dive comps and multi-DPS comps rely on aggression and burst damage. The longer you let the fight drag on, the less effective your strategy of bursting people down becomes. Compare this to Ghost for example. Not only does it have 3 supports for plenty of healing, but also has 3 tanks who have large HP pools, and they can take a lot of hits before they go down. So if you're running goats, whatever the equivalent of goats will become once 222 comes in, against a dive comp, you know that you can outlast them in a longer fight. So you're quite happy if they're taking time to kill people. The longer the brawl goes on, the better it is for you. And you can see this play out across all the various comps. The more sustain they have, the more okay they are with the fight dragging out. The same principle also applies to the map architecture and spawn advantage. For example, on a 2CP map like Hanamura, on point B, the defenders have a huge spawn advantage. This is another form of sustainability. One of the reasons people often struggle to cap 2CP points is that they, as attackers, let the fight drag on too long. They aren't able to get multiple kills quickly. Spawn advantage means that trading kills is favorable for the defender, and the longer you let the fight drag on, the more likely it is that the defender will win. If you're attacking into this, as soon as the enemy respawns, they'll get back into the fight within seconds, whereas for your team, it will take 15, maybe 20 seconds to get back into the fight. That's really big in Overwatch, and that's why in those situations as a defender, it's always in your favor to try and prolong fights and stall, because you have sustainability advantage, and even 1 or 2 kills will allow that to snowball into a fight win. And as an attacker, it's very important that you're constantly aware of this. Often on maps, and not just 2CP, people will continue to fight into situations where they have less sustain or spawn disadvantage, meaning they keep elongating the combat phase and making their own life harder, rather than just calling it over and resetting back to the grouping phase. So to summarize guys, the 3 phases of Overwatch are the grouping, the initiation, and the combat phase. In an absolutely ideal world, all 3 phases would be as short as possible. However, it's never that easy, so you have to understand when you can play with these concepts and manipulate your timings. The grouping phase should always be as short as possible. If you need to set up your attack carefully, either by getting people into range or by taking the correct pathing, then it's definitely worth letting the initiation phase go on a little bit longer. But it depends on your comp, and it depends on where you're going. Sometimes, the initiation phase is decided by unpredictable events, such as an ability getting a lot of value like maybe an anti-nade or a big sleep dart, or there's a random pick involved from one of your teammates. Either way, you should understand what your win condition is, or could be, before you approach your destination. Finally, once you start the fight and enter the combat phase, you want to make sure you understand the dynamic of sustainability and how you compare to the other teams in terms of comp and map geography. If you're at an advantage, then you're suddenly in a position where you don't even need to take any risks. You just need to ask your team to draw the fight out and play the longer game. And once you understand all these concepts, you get a lot better understanding of the game plans in Overwatch, macro elements, and general strategies for how you should approach every fight you take. And that's all I got for today guys. Hope you found this video helpful, and I hope this answers the questions you had about the phases of Overwatch. Obviously this is very theoretical stuff, so don't worry about knowing the exact terms. And like I said, I'm pretty much giving them my own names. You can give them different names if you want, but as long as you understand the general principles and what you're supposed to be doing, you will feel a lot more in control of your games going forwards. While you're here, I just wanted to make a quick announcement. As some of you may already know, I've been hosting a tournament on my Discord for players ranked silver through to platinum called the Medal Cup. Today and tomorrow, I'm going to be streaming and casting the finals of both the EU and NA legs. Today, the day of this video's release, is the EU semis and finals. So please make sure you come and show some love and join me on Twitch, the link to which is in my description. We start at 8:30 PM UK time, so make sure you know what that means for you. Tomorrow, Saturday the 20th of July, I'll be hosting the NA semis and final, which start at 9:30 PM UK time, which is 4:30 PM Eastern Daylight Time in New York, so plan accordingly. I'm really psyched to say I'll be joined by some exciting guests. Coach Mineral will hopefully be making an appearance during the EU finals, and your Overwatch's Frito is going to be joining me on the casting desk on Saturday, so make sure you don't miss out on all the fun. If this tournament goes well, we'll hopefully host some more for people of different SR ranges in the future. As always, I want to give a big shout out to my patrons, and particularly my new top patrons, Cobilium and Leonatus. But that's it from me. I'll be back next week with another video. See you guys soon.